Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Frank Delacroix stood at attention in his dress uniform one last time, watching the flag fold with military precision. 25 years in Army intelligence, followed by 15 years in private security consulting. 40 years of service to country and family. And now, they were handing him a gold watch and a pension. The retirement ceremony took place in the base's oak-paneled hall, filled with colleagues, subordinates, and what he'd thought was his loving family. Rita, his wife of 22 years, sat in the front row wearing the diamond necklace he'd bought her for their anniversary. Their son Trevor, 21 and fresh out of college, checked his phone constantly. Their daughter Madison, 19, seemed more interested in her Instagram than her father's final military moment. Frank had built everything for them. The sprawling house in the suburbs, private school educations, Rita's wellness center that she'd opened 3 years ago. He'd sacrificed deployments, missed birthdays, endured the loneliness of military life, all so they could live comfortably. But Frank Delacroix hadn't survived psychological operations in 3 different theaters by being naive. For the past 6 months, he'd known exactly what Rita was doing. The discovery had been accidental. A text message that popped up on her iPad while she was in the shower, left carelessly on their kitchen counter. Can't wait to be free of the old soldier. Tonight was amazing. B. Boyd Hutchins, Rita's yoga instructor turned business partner. 12 years younger than Frank. All smooth charm and calculated manipulation. Frank had conducted surveillance operations on enemy combatants with less thoroughness than he'd applied to uncovering his wife's affair. He'd installed software on her devices, placed GPS trackers, even rented apartments across from Boyd's loft to photograph their encounters. Rita thought she was clever, but she was an amateur playing against a professional who'd spent decades in intelligence gathering. The affair had been going on for 8 months, but the real betrayal went deeper. Through financial records and intercepted communications, Frank had discovered Rita and Boyd's ultimate plan. Divorce him immediately after retirement, take half his assets, and use his pension to fund their new life together. They'd even involved the children. Trevor had been promised Frank's vintage car collection if he supported the divorce. Madison had been told she could redecorate the house however she wanted once Frank was gone. As the ceremony concluded and people began mingling, Frank felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he'd experienced before every major operation in his military career. Everything was about to change, but he was ready. Rita approached with that smile he'd once found beautiful, now seeing it for what it was, a weapon. "Honey, we need to talk privately," she said, gesturing toward a side room. Frank nodded. "Of course." Chapter 2, The Betrayal. The side room was small and windowless, typically used for private briefings. Rita had chosen it well, isolated, soundproof. Trevor and Madison followed them in, both wearing expressions Frank had never seen before. Cold, calculating, strangers wearing his children's faces. "Frank," Rita began, her voice taking on a tone he'd never heard. Confident, almost predatory. "We need to discuss your retirement plans." She reached into her purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "These are divorce papers. I'm filing immediately." "And these," she produced another envelope, "are foreclosure documents on the house." Frank remained perfectly still, his expression neutral. Years of interrogation training had taught him to reveal nothing. "The house is underwater on the mortgage," Rita continued, her voice gaining strength. "My business partner Boyd has found some irregularities in your finances. Tax liens, unpaid debts you've been hiding from me. The house has to go." Trevor laughed, a sound that cut through Frank like shrapnel. "Should have seen this coming, old man. Mom's been planning this for months. You think we didn't know about your secret bank accounts? Your gambling debts?" Frank's eyes narrowed slightly. Gambling debts? There were no gambling debts. But he said nothing. Madison chimed in with vicious satisfaction. 40 years for nothing. Boyd showed us everything. You've been lying to us our whole lives about money." Rita leaned forward, Her mask completely dropped now. "We're taking the house, and you get nothing. Boyd and I are starting fresh, and the kids support us completely. You can keep your precious military pension. It's barely enough to rent an apartment anyway." She slid the papers across the small table. "Sign them. Make this easy on everyone." Frank looked down at the documents. The divorce papers were standard, but the foreclosure documents were interesting. According to these papers, the house had been refinanced multiple times, with loans taken out in his name that he'd never authorized. Debts to companies he'd never heard of. Financial obligations that painted him as either a compulsive gambler or a man living far beyond his means. This wasn't just adultery and greed. This was fraud. Rita and Boyd had forged his signature on loan documents, created false financial records, and built a case to make him look financially irresponsible. They weren't just stealing his life, they were destroying his reputation. Frank picked up the pen Rita offered. "Okay," he said simply. The words seemed to deflate some of Rita's anticipated drama. She'd clearly expected begging, anger, threats. Instead, Frank began signing documents with the same methodical precision he'd once used to sign operation orders. "That's it?" Trevor asked, sounding almost disappointed. "No fight? No pleading?" Frank looked up at his son. No, at the young man who'd helped plan his destruction. What would be the point? He signed the last document and stood. "I'll pack a bag and be gone within the hour." As he reached the door, Rita called out, "Frank, your pension checks will be direct deposited to the joint account until the divorce is finalized. We'll need that money to cover the house payments until we can sell." Frank paused, but didn't turn around. Of course. Chapter 3, The Departure. Frank's packing was efficient and deliberate. One military duffel bag containing clothes, his medals, a few personal items, and one particular file folder he'd been preparing for months. He moved through the house he'd paid for, past the furniture he'd bought, under the roof he'd provided, feeling like a ghost in his own life. Rita and Boyd were in the kitchen, sharing a bottle of champagne and speaking in hushed, excited tones about their plans. Trevor was on the couch, already looking through car magazines, planning how to sell Frank's restored 1967 Mustang. Madison was upstairs, probably planning her room renovation. None of them looked up as Frank walked out the front door for the last time. He drove to a hotel across town, checked in under a false name he'd established months ago, and opened his laptop. The real Frank Delacroix, the one who'd spent 25 years in psychological operations, was finally going to work. Rita thought she'd discovered his secret finances. In reality, she'd found exactly what he'd wanted her to find. Fake accounts, fabricated debts, false records he'd created specifically to support her narrative. She thought she was playing him, but she'd been playing into his hand from the moment she'd decided to betray him. Frank opened his encrypted files and began making phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, not the family attorney Rita knew about, but a specialist in criminal defense who'd been briefed on Frank's situation months ago. The second call was to a private investigator who'd been documenting every illegal transaction Rita and Boyd had made using Frank's forged signature. The third call was to a former military colleague who now worked in federal banking investigation. By the time Frank closed his laptop 2 hours later, several investigations were about to begin. Rita and Boyd had committed multiple federal crimes: identity theft, bank fraud, mortgage fraud, and forgery. They'd used Frank's military credentials to secure loans, forged his signature on documents, and created a paper trail that would destroy them both. But that was just the beginning. Frank's real plan was far more sophisticated than simple criminal prosecution. He'd spent 6 months creating a web of financial instruments, shell companies, and legal structures that would systematically dismantle everything Rita and Boyd thought they'd stolen. The house they believed they were taking? Frank had quietly restructured the mortgage through a company he controlled. They'd be making payments to him, unknowingly, while he collected evidence of their fraud. Boyd's assets? Frank had invested in the companies Boyd owed money to, gaining enough influence to call in debts at the worst possible moment. Rita's wellness center? Frank had discovered Boyd had been embezzling from it to fund their affair. When that information became public, along with evidence of the forged loans, both their personal and professional reputations would be destroyed. But Frank wasn't finished. He'd learned that Boyd had done this before, seduced wealthy women, manipulated them into financial fraud, then disappeared when the heat got too intense. There were 3 other victims in different states, women who'd lost their homes and savings to Boyd's schemes. Frank had contacted them all. They were very interested in testifying against Boyd and Rita as co-conspirators. As Frank lay on the hotel bed that night, he thought about the phone calls that would start coming soon. Rita would realize she'd walked into a trap. Boyd would discover his carefully constructed new identity was crumbling. Trevor and Madison would learn that their inheritance was funded by crimes they'd helped enable. But Frank Delacroix had learned something in 40 years of service. Patience was the most devastating weapon of all. Chapter 4. The First Tremor. 1 week after Frank's departure, the first cracks began to show. Rita stood in the kitchen of her newly acquired home, staring at a certified letter from Morrison & Associates, a law firm she'd never heard of. The letter was addressed to Frank, but since he'd signed power of attorney over to her, another document she believed she'd cleverly manipulated him into signing, she opened it. Dear Mr. Delacroix, our client, Pinnacle Financial Services, has requested immediate payment of the outstanding balance on account hashtag 4471-89X. Per the terms of your agreement dated March 15th, failure to maintain required payments triggers a full acceleration clause. The entire principal amount of $347,000 is now due within 30 days. Rita's hands shook. $347,000? She'd never heard of Pinnacle Financial Services, and March 15th was during the time she thought Frank was falling for her tricks. She called Boyd immediately. We have a problem. Boyd arrived within an hour, his usual confident swagger replaced by nervous energy. What kind of problem? Rita showed him the letter. Boyd's face went pale as he read. This doesn't make sense, he said. We traced all of Frank's accounts. There was no loan this big. Unless he was hiding more than we thought, Rita said, her voice rising. Maybe the gambling debts were real. Maybe. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Sunrise Bank, where they'd applied for the mortgage transfer on the house. Mrs. Delacroix, this is Janet Harrison from Sunrise Bank. We need to discuss some irregularities in your mortgage application. Rita's stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? The documentation you provided appears to have been altered. We're going to need to verify all signatures with your husband present. Can you have him come in this week? Rita hung up and immediately dialed Frank's number. It went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, across town, Trevor was experiencing his own crisis. He'd gone to the DMV to transfer ownership of Frank's Mustang, only to discover the car was registered to a company called Delacroix Holdings, not to Frank personally. The clerk informed him that he'd need corporate authorization to transfer the title. But it's my father's car, Trevor protested. According to our records, sir, this vehicle is corporate property. You'll need to contact the company's legal department. Trevor called the number provided, reaching an automated system that eventually connected him to a law office. The attorney who answered was polite but firm. I'm sorry, but Mr. Delacroix specifically instructed us that no family members are authorized to access corporate assets without his written permission. Where is my father? Trevor demanded. I'm not authorized to provide that information. Madison was facing her own problems. She'd attempted to use one of Frank's credit cards to buy new furniture, only to discover the account had been frozen. When she called the credit card company, they informed her that the account holder had reported potential fraud and requested a security hold on all transactions. By evening, the 3 conspirators were gathered in Rita's kitchen, each bringing their own piece of bad news. It's like he knew, Rita said, pacing. Like he planned this. Boyd shook his head. That's impossible. Frank's a simple soldier. He doesn't have the sophistication to set up something this complex. Then explain this. Rita slammed down another letter that had arrived that afternoon. It was from the IRS, requesting documentation for unreported income in Boyd's name. Income that appeared to be connected to Rita's business. Boyd stared at the letter. I never received unreported income from your business. I know that, and you know that, but someone's been reporting payments to you. Large payments. For the past 6 months. Trevor looked up from his phone. Guys, We have bigger problems. I just got a call from my bank. They're freezing my accounts, pending an investigation into suspicious deposits. What suspicious deposits? Rita asked. Apparently, someone's been depositing money into my account from offshore companies. Money I never received, but the paper trail says I did. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Frank hadn't just discovered their plan. He'd been building a counterplan. Every move they'd made, every document they'd forged, every lie they'd told, had been anticipated. Rita's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. She opened her laptop and found a message with no text, just a video attachment. When she clicked play, she saw herself and Boyd in his apartment, discussing their plans to frame Frank for gambling debts. The timestamp showed it was from 3 months ago. Another message arrived. This is just the beginning. Boyd stood up abruptly. I'm leaving town. Tonight. You can't leave, Rita said desperately. We're in this together. No, Boyd said, backing toward the door. You're in this. I was never married to him. I can disappear. But as Boyd reached for the door handle, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number from Arizona. Boyd, honey, are you in some kind of trouble? 2 men in suits came by asking about you. They said they were federal agents. Boyd's face went white. He looked at Rita, then at Trevor and Madison. He's not just coming for us, Boyd whispered. He's destroying everything we ever touched. Chapter 5. The Tightening Noose. Frank sat in his hotel room, monitoring multiple computer screens showing bank accounts, legal documents, and surveillance footage. 3 weeks had passed since he'd signed the papers, and his trap was working perfectly. Rita had made 7 desperate calls to his phone, each more frantic than the last. Boyd had attempted to flee the state, only to be stopped at the airport by federal agents investigating the fraudulent loans. Trevor and Madison had both received visits from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. But Frank's plan was far more intricate than they'd yet discovered. He'd spent 6 months creating a complex web of shell companies, all legally registered, all designed to ensnare Rita and Boyd in their own greed. Every forged signature they'd used, every false document they'd created, had been traced back to specific criminal acts that carried federal penalties. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he'd been expecting. Mr. Delacroix? This is Detective Sarah Chun with the city police. We have Rita Delacroix in custody. She's asking to speak with you. Frank smiled for the first time in weeks. What are the charges? Multiple counts of forgery, identity theft, and bank fraud. But we think there's more. She claims you set her up, but the evidence suggests she and her co-conspirator Boyd Hutchins orchestrated an elaborate fraud scheme using your identity. I'll be right there. The police station was familiar territory for Frank. He'd consulted with law enforcement agencies throughout his career, helping them understand criminal psychology and interrogation techniques. Now those skills were serving him personally. Rita sat in the interrogation room, looking haggard and desperate. When Frank entered with his attorney, her eyes blazed with fury. You bastard, she hissed. You planned this whole thing. Frank sat down calmly across from her. I signed the papers you gave me. I left quietly. What happens after that is simply the natural consequence of your choices. The loans you took out in my name, the shell companies, the fake accounts, you created all of that to frame me. Frank's attorney leaned forward. My client has never taken out unauthorized loans or created false accounts. The evidence shows that you and Mr. Hutchins forged his signature on multiple financial instruments. The companies you borrowed from are all legitimate businesses with proper legal standing. But the timing, Rita started. The timing of what? Frank asked. The timing of you deciding to commit fraud? The timing of you choosing to forge my signature? The timing of you planning to steal my assets through false documentation? Rita's face crumpled. Where are my children? What have you done to Trevor and Madison? They're adults, Frank said. They made their own choices. Trevor accepted money from offshore accounts to support your fraud. Madison helped create false financial records. They're facing their own legal consequences. They're your children. Frank's expression didn't change. No, my children wouldn't have betrayed me. My children wouldn't have helped you destroy me. The people calling themselves Trevor and Madison are strangers who happen to share my DNA. Rita began to cry, but Frank felt nothing. He'd buried his emotions for her months ago, when he'd first discovered her betrayal. "Frank, please," she whispered. "I made a mistake. I was scared about money, about the future. Boyd convinced me." "Stop." Frank's voice cut through her pleading. "You made a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to involve our children in your betrayal. You chose to commit crimes using my identity. Every consequence you're facing is the direct result of those choices." He stood to leave, but Rita grabbed his arm. "What happens now?" Frank looked down at her hand on his arm, and she quickly released it. "Now you face federal charges for bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Boyd faces similar charges, plus charges in 3 other states for similar schemes he's run before. Trevor and Madison will likely face reduced charges if they cooperate with investigators." Rita's face went pale. "Other states? Did you really think you were Boyd's first victim? He's been running this same scheme for years, seducing wealthy women, manipulating them into financial fraud, then disappearing when things got complicated. You were just the latest mark." Frank turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Rita, the house you thought you were taking? The mortgage payments you've been making for the past 3 weeks? They've been going to one of my companies. Thank you for keeping up with the payments." As Frank left the police station, he felt the same calm satisfaction he'd experienced after successful military operations. Phase 1 was complete. Rita and Boyd were facing serious federal charges. Trevor and Madison were learning that actions have consequences. But Frank wasn't finished. There were still debts to be paid, and Frank Delacroix always collected what was owed to him. Chapter 6: The Reckoning Begins. The federal courthouse was a monument to justice, its marble columns and brass fixtures gleaming under the morning sun. Frank sat in the gallery, watching as Rita and Boyd were led in wearing orange jumpsuits, their hands shackled. 6 months had passed since his retirement ceremony. Rita had been denied bail after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. Boyd had attempted to flee twice, once making it as far as Mexico before being extradited back. Trevor and Madison sat in the front row with their court-appointed attorneys, both having agreed to testify against their mother and Boyd in exchange for reduced sentences. They looked older, broken by the weight of their choices. Frank's attorney, Marcus Thornfield, leaned over and whispered, "The prosecutor says Rita wants to make a deal. She's willing to plead guilty to all charges if you'll speak on her behalf at sentencing." Frank's expression remained neutral. "No. She's claiming the affair was just a mistake, that Boyd manipulated her into the financial fraud. Irrelevant. Frank, she's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Boyd's looking at even more." Frank turned to look at his attorney. "Marcus, I spent 25 years defending this country from people who betrayed it. I've never shown mercy to traitors, and I'm not starting now." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Walsh, called her first witness, Frank himself. As Frank took the stand, he looked directly at Rita. She mouthed the word, "please," but he might as well have been looking at a stranger. "Mr. Delacroix," Prosecutor Walsh began, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendants?" "Rita Delacroix was my wife for 22 years. Boyd Hutchins was her business partner and, as I later discovered, her lover. Trevor and Madison Delacroix are my biological children." "Can you describe how you discovered the fraud scheme?" Frank's testimony was methodical and devastating. He detailed how he'd uncovered the affair, the forged documents, the false financial records. He explained how Rita and Boyd had used his military credentials to secure loans, forged his signature on multiple documents, and involved his children in their conspiracy. "The defendants believed they were manipulating me," Frank said. "In reality, they were revealing their true character. I simply documented their crimes and allowed the legal system to take its course." Rita's attorney, a nervous young man clearly out of his depth, tried to cross-examine Frank. "Mr. Delacroix, isn't it true that you orchestrated this entire scenario to frame my client?" Frank's stare could have frozen fire. "Your client forged my signature on loan documents. Your client created false financial records. Your client committed identity theft. These are crimes she chose to commit. I simply ensured there was evidence of her choices." But you set up the shell companies. I set up legitimate businesses through proper legal channels. The fact that your client chose to defraud those businesses doesn't make me responsible for her crimes. When Boyd's attorney tried a similar approach, Frank's response was even more devastating. Mr. Hutchins has committed similar fraud in Nevada, California, and Arizona, targeting wealthy women and manipulating them into financial crimes. He saw my wife as another mark. The fact that she willingly participated doesn't make her a victim. It makes her a co-conspirator. After 3 days of testimony, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. On the count of forgery, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. The pattern repeated for all charges against both Rita and Boyd. Trevor and Madison received suspended sentences and probation in exchange for their cooperation, but they were now convicted felons. At sentencing, Rita was given 18 years in federal prison. Boyd received 25 years, with additional time for his previous crimes in other states. As the bailiffs led them away, Rita looked back at Frank one last time. Her expression was pleading, desperate, seeking some sign of the man she'd once manipulated. Frank's face remained expressionless. As far as he was concerned, Rita Delacroix had died the day she betrayed him. The woman being led away in shackles was just a criminal paying for her crimes. Chapter 7. Settling all accounts. 2 years after the trial, Frank stood in the conference room of his private security firm, Delacroix Strategic Solutions. The company had grown rapidly, built on Frank's reputation and the contacts he'd made during his military career. His assistant, Lucy, knocked and entered. "Mr. Delacroix, Trevor is here to see you." Frank didn't look up from his files. "I'm not available." "Sir," he says it's about his mother. "She's been hospitalized." Frank finally looked up. "Send him in. 5 minutes." Trevor entered looking haggard and desperate. Prison had been hard on Rita, and the stress was showing on their son as well. "Dad, please," Trevor began. "Mom's had a heart attack. The doctors say the stress of prison is killing her. She needs medical care that the prison can't provide." Frank gestured to a chair, but remained standing. "Sit." Trevor sat, looking more like a supplicant than a son. "Dad, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but she's dying, and—" Trevor's face crumpled. "Please, Dad, I'm begging you. Use your influence. Get her transferred to a medical facility. Help her." Frank walked to the window overlooking the city. His company occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, a symbol of how far he'd risen since his retirement. "Trevor, you made your choice 2 years ago. You chose to help your mother destroy me. You chose to accept money from fraudulent accounts. You chose to laugh at my expense. Those choices have consequences. But she's your wife." "No." Frank turned around, his voice cold as Arctic wind. "She was my wife. The woman in prison is a convicted felon who committed crimes against me. You want me to show mercy to someone who showed me none?" Trevor stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. What happened to forgiveness? What happened to family? Frank walked over to his desk and picked up a photograph. It was from his retirement ceremony, showing Rita, Trevor, and Madison smiling as they presented him with a gift they'd given him knowing they were about to destroy his life. "Family doesn't betray family," Frank said quietly. "Family doesn't laugh at family's destruction. Family doesn't commit crimes against family. The people in this photograph were never my family. They were actors playing roles, waiting for the right moment to strike." He set the photograph down. "Your mother chose her path. You chose yours. Now live with the consequences." Trevor's desperation turned to rage. "You're a monster. She loved you." Frank's expression didn't change. "She loved my money. She loved my status. She loved the life I provided. She never loved me. If she had, she wouldn't have betrayed me." "Fine," Trevor said, standing. "But what about Madison? She's struggling, Dad. She can't find work with a felony record. She's living in a studio apartment, working minimum wage jobs. She was just a kid when this happened." Frank walked back to his desk and sat down. Madison was 19 years old. an adult capable of making adult decisions. She chose to help you and your mother commit crimes. She chose to laugh at my destruction. She chose to help plan my financial ruin. He opened a file on his desk. According to my investigators, Madison is currently working 3 jobs to pay rent on a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. She's applied to 47 companies in the past 6 months and been rejected by all of them due to her criminal record. Trevor looked shocked. You've been monitoring her? I monitor all threats to my security. That includes people who have committed crimes against me, regardless of their DNA. Frank closed the file. Your 5 minutes are up. Trevor didn't move. Dad, please. I'm asking you to be human. Frank stood and walked to the door, opening it. I'm being human. I'm being the kind of human who doesn't forgive betrayal. I'm being the kind of human who holds traitors accountable for their actions. I'm being the kind of human who learned that mercy is weakness when dealing with people who would destroy you. As Trevor walked to the door, Frank spoke one final time. Trevor, you want forgiveness? You want mercy? You should have thought about that before you chose to betray me. Actions have consequences. You're living with yours now. After Trevor left, Frank returned to his desk. He'd built a new life from the ashes of his old one, and it was better than anything he'd had before. His company was thriving. His reputation was sterling. He was wealthy, powerful, and free from the people who'd tried to destroy him. Rita was dying in prison. Boyd was serving his sentence in maximum security. Trevor and Madison were struggling with the consequences of their choices. Frank felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but he felt no sympathy either. They made their choices. Now they were living with the results. Chapter 8. The Last Visit. The federal prison was a fortress of concrete and steel, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Frank had been here before, consulting on security matters for the government. He'd never imagined he'd be visiting as someone's husband. Rita lay in the prison hospital, connected to monitors and 4 lines. She looked 20 years older than her actual age, her hair gray and thin, her face gaunt. Prison had not been kind to her. She looked up as Frank entered, her eyes filling with tears. Frank, she whispered. You came. Frank pulled up a chair, but didn't sit close to the bed. The warden called. He said you were dying. Rita tried to smile. I guess I am. The doctors say my heart is failing. Too much stress, they say. Frank said nothing. Frank, I need to tell you something. About Boyd. About everything. I know everything I need to know. Rita shook her head weakly. No, you don't. Boyd, he showed me pictures. Pictures of you with other women during your deployments. He said you've been cheating on me for years. He said you never loved me, that I was just convenient. Frank's expression didn't change. There were no other women. I know that now. Rita said, tears streaming down her face. I know the pictures were fake. I know Boyd manipulated me. But at the time, I believed him. I thought you'd been lying to me our entire marriage. Frank stood up. It doesn't matter. It does matter. Rita's voice gained strength. I loved you, Frank. I really did love you. I was just scared. Scared that you'd leave me. Scared that I'd wasted my life on someone who didn't care about me. Frank walked to the window, looking out at the prison yard where inmates were exercising. Rita, even if Boyd showed you fake pictures, even if you believed I was cheating, that doesn't justify fraud. That doesn't justify forging my signature on loan documents. That doesn't justify involving our children in a scheme to destroy me. I know, Rita whispered. I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you in ways I can never fix. Frank turned back to face her. You didn't just hurt me, Rita. You betrayed me. You took our children, our own children, and turned them into accomplices in your crime. You made them laugh at my pain. You made them participants in my destruction. Rita closed her eyes. I was angry. I was hurt. I wanted to hurt you back. And you succeeded. Frank walked back to the chair, but didn't sit down. Rita, you want absolution. You want me to forgive you, so you can die in peace. But I'm not a priest, and this isn't a confessional. You made choices. Those choices destroyed our family, destroyed our children's futures, and nearly destroyed me. Frank, please. You want to know what hurts the most? Frank's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. It's not the affair. It's not even the fraud. It's that you made our children into monsters. Trevor and Madison were good kids before you poisoned them against me. You turned them into criminals. You destroyed their lives along with yours. Rita was sobbing now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Frank stood by her bedside, looking down at the woman who'd shared his life for 22 years, the woman who'd given him 2 children, the woman who'd betrayed him more completely than any enemy he'd ever faced. Rita, I'm not here to forgive you. I'm not here to offer comfort. I'm here to tell you something important. She looked up at him hopefully. Your choices have consequences. Trevor is working night shifts in a warehouse, struggling to pay rent. Madison is cleaning offices at night because no one will hire a convicted felon during the day. They're both broken people, struggling with addiction and depression. Rita's face went pale. Addiction. Trevor's been arrested twice for possession. Madison's been in rehab 3 times. Your choices didn't just destroy you, they destroyed them too. Frank turned to leave. Frank, wait, Rita called out desperately. What about Mercy? What about the man I married? The man who believed in second chances? Frank paused at the door. That man died the day his wife and children served him divorce papers at his retirement ceremony. The man you're talking to now is someone different, someone harder, someone who learned that mercy is a luxury he can't afford. He opened the door, then looked back one final time. Goodbye, Rita. As Frank walked down the prison corridor, he heard her calling his name, but he didn't turn back. He'd said what he came to say. There was nothing left between them now but the consequences of her choices. Chapter 9. The Final Victory. Frank stood in his office 5 years after his retirement ceremony, looking out at the city sprawling below him. Delacroix Strategic Solutions now occupied an entire building, employing over 200 people and generating tens of millions in revenue annually. His assistant knocked and entered. Mr. Delacroix, there's been a development. Frank turned from the window. What kind of development? Rita Delacroix died last night. Heart failure. The prison warden called this morning. Frank nodded once. Thank you for letting me know. His assistant hesitated. Sir, there's more. Boyd Hutchins was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide. Frank felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no sense of closure. Rita and Boyd were simply problems that had solved themselves. Also, his assistant continued, Trevor and Madison have both requested meetings with you. Separately, Frank walked to his desk and sat down. Schedule them for tomorrow. 15 minutes each. The next day, Madison entered his office first. She looked tired, worn down by years of struggling with the consequences of her choices. But there was something different about her, a kind of resigned maturity that hadn't been there before. Dad, she said quietly, sitting across from his desk. Madison, I heard about Mom. I wanted to thank you. Frank raised an eyebrow. Thank me? Madison nodded. For not helping her. For not showing mercy. For letting us face the consequences of what we did. Frank said nothing, waiting. I've been going to therapy, Madison continued. Real therapy, not court-ordered. I've been trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could laugh at their father's pain. How I could participate in destroying you. She took a deep breath. The therapist says I was never really your daughter. I was Mom's puppet. I did what she wanted because it was easier than thinking for myself. But that's not an excuse. I made choices. Bad choices. Frank's expression remained neutral. Yes, you did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Madison said. I'm not asking for help. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that you're not my father anymore, and I'm not your daughter. We're just 2 people who used to know each other. She stood up. I also wanted you to know that I'm doing okay. Not great, but okay. I'm clean. I have a job. I have a small apartment. I'm paying my own way for the first time in my life. Frank looked at her for a long moment. Good. Madison walked to the door, then paused. Dad? Frank? I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. For building all this. For not letting us destroy you. For being stronger than we were. After Madison left, Trevor entered. He looked worse than his sister. Older, harder, with the look of a man who'd lost too many battles. She's dead, Trevor said without preamble. I know. Trevor sat down heavily. I hated you for a long time. Blamed you for everything. Blamed you for Mom's death, for Madison's problems, for my own failures. Frank waited. But I've had time to think. 5 years of thinking. And I realized something. Trevor looked up at Frank. You didn't destroy us. We destroyed ourselves. We made the choice to betray you. We made the choice to laugh at your pain. We made the choice to help Mom commit crimes. Trevor's voice cracked slightly. I've been jealous of you, you know that? Jealous that you survived what we did to you. Jealous that you built something better. Jealous that you moved on while we're still trapped by what we did. Frank's expression didn't change. Jealousy is a choice too. Trevor laughed bitterly. Yeah, it is. Just like everything else. He stood up. I'm not asking for anything, Frank. I'm not asking for forgiveness or help or a second chance. I'm just here to tell you that you won. Completely. Absolutely. Trevor walked toward the door, then turned back. You want to know the worst part? The part that really destroys me? It's not that we lost. It's that we deserved to lose. We deserved everything that happened to us. As Trevor left, Frank returned to his window. The city stretched out below him, full of possibilities and opportunities. He'd built a new life from nothing, surrounded himself with loyal employees and trusted associates. He was wealthy, successful, and free. Rita was dead. Boyd was dead. Trevor and Madison were broken remnants of their former selves, struggling to survive in a world that had no place for them. Frank had won, but victory tasted like ash. Not because he regretted his actions. He didn't. Not because he felt guilty. He felt nothing. Victory tasted like ash because winning had required becoming someone he'd never wanted to be. Someone who could look at his dying wife and feel nothing. Someone who could watch his children suffer and feel no compassion. But that was the price of betrayal. Rita and his children had forced him to become this person. They'd killed the man who might have shown mercy, who might have forgiven, who might have offered second chances. Frank Delacroix had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes survival requires becoming a monster. Sometimes winning means losing everything that made you human. As the sun set over the city, Frank stood alone in his office, surrounded by the empire he'd built from the ashes of his destroyed life. He was powerful, wealthy, and completely, utterly alone. But he was alive, and his enemies were not. In the end, that was victory enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Discovery. Matthew Hardy had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years as a homicide detective in Portland had taught him to spot lies, fear, and guilt from across a room. But Dr. Guillermo Walls was harder to read than most. The dentist's hands trembled slightly as he placed the x-ray on the light board, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something Matthew couldn't quite identify. Emma's cavity is the least of our concerns, Dr. Walls said, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced toward the waiting room where 8-year-old Emma sat reading a book, her legs swinging from the chair. Mr. Hardy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Matthew's wife, Krista, shifted beside him, her nurse's instincts picking up on the tension. What's wrong? She asked. Dr. Walls pointed to a shadow in Emma's lower jaw on the x-ray. At first glance, it looked like a normal tooth formation, but as Matthew studied it closer, he noticed something unsettling. The shadow had perfectly geometric edges, almost crystalline in structure, and it seemed to extend deeper into the bone than any tooth should. This isn't natural, Dr. Walls continued. In 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything like it. It appears to be integrated with her jawbone, like it's been growing with her since birth. Matthew's training kicked in. He noted the sweat beading on the dentist's forehead, the way his eyes kept darting to the door. You've seen something like this before, he said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Walls hesitated, then pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. There's someone who needs to know about this. He started dialing, then stopped, looking directly at Matthew. Mr. Hardy, who is Emma really? Where did she come from? The question hit like a physical blow. Matthew felt Krista's hand tighten on his arm. They'd adopted Emma when she was 6 months old through a private agency. The paperwork had been impeccable, the background checks thorough. Emma's birth mother had been a young woman who died in a car accident shortly after signing the adoption papers. "We adopted her legally," Krista said defensively. Everything was documented. "The adoption agency," Matthew said slowly, his detective instincts now fully engaged. "What was it called again?" "Sunrise Family Services," Krista replied. "Why? What does this have to do with?" Dr. Walls finished dialing his number. As he waited for an answer, he said, "Because I've seen one other case like this. A child in Seattle about 5 years ago. The parents brought him in for a routine cleaning. His face darkened. That family disappeared 3 days later. The authorities found their house empty. No signs of struggle, no forwarding address. Like they'd never existed." The phone connected. "Dr. Dunlap? It's Guillermo. Yes, I know what time it is. Listen, I got another one. The marker, it's here. In Portland." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "No, I'm sure. Same crystalline structure, same integration pattern. The child is 8 years old." Matthew's blood ran cold. He stepped forward and pressed the disconnect button on Dr. Wall's phone. "Who is Dr. Dunlap? And why are you calling him about my daughter?" The dentist's face went pale. "Mr. Hardy, you don't understand. Dr. Philip Dunlap is a researcher. He's been tracking these cases for years. He's trying to help." "Help what?" Matthew's voice carried the authority of 2 decades in law enforcement. "Start talking. Now." Dr. Walls glanced toward the waiting room again. "Not here. Not with Emma nearby. Meet me tonight at my office, 9 o'clock. Come alone. And Mr. Hardy?" He grabbed Matthew's arm. "Don't trust anyone else with this information." "Not yet." As they left the dental office, Emma skipped between her parents, oblivious to the tension radiating from the adults. "Dad," Dr. Walls seemed scared, she said with the perceptiveness that had always amazed Matthew. "Did I do something wrong?" Matthew knelt down to Emma's level, looking into eyes that were the same shade of green as Krista's, though they shared no genetic connection. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have confusing conversations." That evening, after Emma was tucked into bed, Matthew sat in his study reviewing everything he could find about Sunrise Family Services. The agency had closed down 7 years ago, citing financial difficulties. But something nagged at him about the timing. He pulled up news archives from that period and found a small article buried in the Portland Tribune, local adoption agency under investigation for irregular practices. The article was frustratingly vague, mentioning only that the state had questions about the agency's record-keeping and source documentation for several adoptions. No charges had been filed, and the investigation had apparently died when the agency voluntarily closed. Krista appeared in the doorway, still in her scrubs from the late shift at the hospital. "Find anything?" "Questions. Lots of questions." He showed her the article. "Did you ever meet Emma's birth mother?" "No, remember? She died before we could meet her. The social worker, Mrs. What was her name? Pat something." "Pat Charles," Matthew said, pulling up the adoption file from their safe. "Let's see what we can find about her." 30 minutes of searching revealed that Pat Charles had worked for Sunrise Family Services for exactly 8 months, just long enough to handle Emma's adoption. Before that, no employment history. After the agency closed, she'd vanished from public records entirely. Matthew's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't go to the dentist tonight. They're watching. Meet me at Pioneer Courthouse Square, Fountainside, 10 p.m. Come alone. Gee." He showed the text to Krista. "This is getting complicated fast. Should we call the police?" Matthew considered it. His former colleagues would help, but this felt bigger than a local investigation. Someone had placed something in their daughter's jaw, and people were willing to threaten families to keep it secret. "Not yet. Let me talk to Dr. Walls first. If this is what I think it is, we're going to need to be very careful about who we trust." As he prepared to leave for the meeting, Matthew checked his service weapon and spare magazine. Whatever was happening, someone had turned their 8-year-old daughter into the center of it. And Matthew Hardy had never backed down from a fight in his life. Chapter 2. The Meeting. Pioneer Courthouse Square bustled with late evening activity despite the October chill. Matthew positioned himself near the fountain, scanning faces with practiced efficiency. At 10:03, Dr. Walls appeared from the direction of the Mac station, looking over his shoulder every few steps. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Walls said, settling beside Matthew on the fountain's edge. "I wasn't sure you would. Start talking. What's in my daughter's jaw?" Dr. Walls pulled out a tablet, showing Matthew a magnified version of Emma's X-ray alongside another image. "This is the Seattle case I mentioned. Same structure, same placement. We call them biomarkers. There's a group of us. Doctors, researchers, a few parents who figured out." Dr. Walls swiped to another image. "These markers aren't natural, Mr. Hardy. They're manufactured, planted in children during infancy." Matthew studied the images. The crystalline structures were identical, perfectly symmetrical in a way that nature never produced. Planted by who? That's where it gets complicated. Dr. Walls glanced around nervously. The markers contain encoded genetic information, DNA samples, blood type, tissue compatibility data. Essentially, they turn children into living medical databases. For what purpose? Organ harvesting, experimental surgeries. The markers identify children with rare genetic traits or perfect tissue matches for wealthy clients. Dr. Wall's voice dropped further. Dr. Philip Dunlap runs the operation. He's been doing this for 15 years, maybe longer. Matthew felt rage building in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. "And you help him?" "No," Dr. Walls said quickly. "I discovered the first case by accident. When that Seattle family disappeared, I started investigating. I've been documenting cases, trying to build evidence. But Dunlap has connections everywhere. Government contracts, hospital boards, university research departments. How many children? We've identified 47 markers across 6 states. Emma makes 48. Dr. Walls showed Matthew a map on his tablet, dots scattered across the Pacific Northwest. Most parents never know. Regular dentists miss the markers because they blend with natural bone structure. I only noticed because I specialize in pediatric orthodontics. Matthew processed this information, his detective mind automatically organizing facts and implications. "The phone call today. You warned Dunlap about Emma." Dr. Walls nodded miserably. "Standard protocol. I report new discoveries, and he dispatches a team to evaluate the child. Usually, they approach the family with offers for free medical research participation. If the family refuses," he gestured helplessly, "they disappear. Or worse. The Martinez family in Sacramento refused. Their son died in a car accident 2 weeks later. The markers were surgically removed post-mortem." Matthew's hands clenched into fists. Someone had been planning to use his daughter as spare parts. "How long do we have?" Dunlap's team usually arrives within 48 hours of initial contact. But there's something else. Dr. Walls hesitated. "Your adoption agency, Sunrise Family Services. It was a front operation. Dunlap funded it specifically to place marker children with families who wouldn't ask difficult questions. Meaning, law enforcement families, military, medical professionals. People who trust institutions and follow proper channels. People who would be unlikely to investigate irregularities in their child's medical history." The pieces clicked into place. Their adoption had been too smooth, too perfect. No waiting lists, no complications, minimal paperwork. They'd been selected as much as they'd selected Emma. "I need the location of Dunlap's operation," Matthew said. "Mr. Hardy, you can't just—" "The location." Dr. Walls pulled up another file on his tablet. "He has a private medical facility outside Seattle. Officially, it's a pediatric research center focusing on genetic disorders. Unofficially, he showed Matthew satellite images of a compound surrounded by high fences and security cameras. It's where they take the children." Matthew memorized the address and surrounding geography. Who else knows about this? A small group. Dr. Rosario Chan in San Francisco. She's been tracking the West Coast cases. Earl Rich, a private investigator in Denver whose grandson had a marker. And Veronica Harmon. She's a federal prosecutor, but she's also a parent. Her daughter was taken 3 years ago. Taken. Emma's not the first child Dunlap has tried to reclaim. Sometimes he approaches families directly, offers large sums of money for extended medical studies. When that fails, children have accidents, or families receive offers they can't refuse. Matthew stood up, decision made. I need contact information for your group, and I need everything you have on Dunlap's operation. What are you planning? I'm going to get my daughter back. Mr. Hardy, she's not gone yet. Maybe if you cooperate with Dunlap. Matthew turned, and Dr. Wall saw something in his eyes that made him step backward. Doctor, someone surgically altered my daughter without consent and has been planning to harvest her organs since infancy. Cooperation isn't on the table. As Matthew walked away, Dr. Walls called after him. Be careful. Dunlap has resources you can't imagine. Money, connections, people in government positions. He's untouchable through normal channels. Matthew paused. Normal channels aren't what I had in mind. Back home, he found Krista in Emma's room, watching their daughter sleep. How bad is it? She whispered. Bad. He told her everything, watching his wife's face cycle through disbelief, horror, and finally, cold determination. This was why he'd fallen in love with Krista Hardy 15 years ago. She was a fighter. What do we do? Matthew looked at Emma, peaceful in sleep, unaware that someone viewed her as inventory rather than a child. We disappear for a few days while I handle this. Can you get time off from the hospital? I'll call in sick. Krista's voice carried the same steely resolve that had gotten her through nursing school while working 2 jobs. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. I have an old army buddy with a cabin in the Cascades. Off the grid, defensible position. Matthew was already planning logistics. Pack light. We leave first thing in the morning. And then, Matthew checked his weapon again, ensuring a round was chambered. Then I paid Dr. Philip Dunlap a visit he'll never forget. As they prepared for what might be a long absence, Matthew called in a favor from his former partner, Detective Bruce Weber. Bruce, I need a background check on a Dr. Philip Dunlap in Seattle. Medical researcher, probably his government contracts. Matt, you've been retired for 2 years. What's this about? Someone's threatening my family. I need to know what I'm up against. Bruce's tone shifted. How deep do you want me to dig? Deep enough to bury him. Chapter 3. First Contact. The cabin belonged to Harvey Aguilar, Matthew's former squad leader from their Army days. Nestled in a valley 40 miles east of Portland, it was accessible only by a winding dirt road that Harvey had rigged with motion sensors. If anyone approached uninvited, they'd know about it long before visitors reached the cabin. Matthew had spent the morning teaching Emma to fish in the nearby stream, while Krista organized their temporary living space. To an 8-year-old, this felt like an adventure. To her parents, it felt like hiding from a nightmare. Bruce Weber's call came through at 2 p.m. Matt, what the hell have you stumbled into? Bruce's voice carried an edge Matthew had heard only during their worst cases. Philip Dunlap doesn't exist. What do you mean? I mean the identity is fabricated. Well-crafted, backed by decades of false documentation, but fabricated. The real Philip Dunlap died in a car accident in 1987. Someone's been using his social security number and medical credentials for 20 years. Matthew felt ice in his veins. Any idea who's really behind it? That's where it gets interesting. The medical facility outside Seattle, it's owned by a shell company called Genesis Medical Research. That company is owned by another shell company, which is owned by another. But I followed the money, and it all traces back to a private equity fund managed by one Curtis Palmer. The name meant nothing to Matthew, but Bruce continued. Palmer's got his fingers in a dozen different medical research operations across the country. Officially, he's a legitimate businessman. Unofficially, word is he's connected to some very dark medical experiments dating back to the 90s. Government connections? Deep ones. Palmer has contracts with the Department of Defense, the CDC, and half a dozen university research programs. If you're planning to take him on through official channels, forget it. He's got protection at levels you can't reach. Matthew walked outside, keeping Emma in sight while he processed this information. What about the Seattle facility? That's the strangest part. According to county records, the facility was evacuated 3 days ago. Officially, they're relocating due to infrastructure concerns. But Matt, I drove by there this morning. The place is gutted. They didn't relocate, they ran. Someone tipped them off? Has to be. The question is who? Bruce paused. Matt, there's something else. I ran a check on your adoption agency, Sunrise Family Services. You're not going to like this. Matthew braced himself. Tell me. The agency handled 312 adoptions during its 8-year operation. I cross-referenced with missing children reports and found something disturbing. 46 children placed by Sunrise have been reported missing or have died under suspicious circumstances in the past decade. The number made Matthew's stomach turn. 46 families destroyed. 46 children stolen or killed. Emma's number 47. Not if I can help it, Bruce said. I'm driving up to Seattle tomorrow to check the facility. If there's evidence left behind, I'll find it. After ending the call, Matthew found Krista teaching Emma to identify edible plants near the cabin. His wife's medical background made her naturally cautious, but she was adapting to their wilderness refuge with surprising resilience. Daddy, look, Emma held up a handful of blackberries. Mom says these are safe to eat in the wild. Matthew forced a smile. That's good to know, sweetheart. What else did Mom teach you? How to tell if water is clean to drink and which berries are poisonous, and how to signal for help if we get lost. Emma's excitement was infectious. Are we going to live here forever? Just for a little while, Matthew said, meeting Krista's eyes over Emma's head. We're having an adventure. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, Matthew and Krista sat by the fire planning their next move. We can't run forever, Krista said. Emma needs to go back to school, see her friends. I know. That's why I'm going to end this. Ow! Matthew had been thinking about this all day. Palmer and his operation had survived by staying in shadows, using legitimate fronts and government connections to avoid scrutiny. But shadows worked both ways. Palmer's strength is also his weakness. He operates through intermediaries and shell companies because he can't afford direct exposure. If I can force him into the open, make him act personally instead of through surrogates, he becomes vulnerable. That sounds dangerous. Less dangerous than letting him come after Emma. Matthew poked the fire, sending sparks into the night sky. I've been reading about his operations. He's methodical, patient. He doesn't like surprises or complications. I'm going to give him both. Krista studied her husband's profile in the firelight. She'd seen this expression before, during the handful of cases that had consumed him completely. Matthew Hardy could be gentle and patient, a devoted father and husband. But when someone threatened his family, he became something else entirely. What do you need me to do? Keep Emma safe. Hardy's rigged this place with enough security to hold off an army. If something goes wrong, there's a satellite phone in the kitchen. Call the FBI field office in Portland and ask for Agent Jose Scott. Bruce gave me his name. He's clean, not connected to Palmer's network. And if something goes very wrong... Matthew handed her a key. Harvey's got a weapons cache in the basement. You know how to use everything down there. They both knew that if it came to that, they'd already lost. But Matthew had learned long ago that the difference between surviving and dying often came down to preparation and the willingness to do what others wouldn't. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Hardy, we need to talk. Dr. Dunlap would like to discuss Emma's medical future. Cooperation benefits everyone. VH. Matthew showed the message to Krista. VH Veronica Harmon, the federal prosecutor Dr. Walls mentioned. The one whose daughter was taken. Matthew was already formulating a response. If Veronica Harmon was working with Palmer now, it meant they'd either bought her cooperation or she'd never been on their side to begin with. Either way, it was time to draw them out. He typed back, Lighthouse Park, Portland. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone. The response came immediately. Agreed. Don't make this more complicated than necessary. Matthew smiled grimly. Complicated was exactly what he had in mind. Chapter 4. The Trap. Lighthouse Park offered excellent sight lines and multiple escape routes, crucial for a meeting with potentially hostile parties. Matthew arrived an hour early, positioning himself with a clear view of all approaches while remaining concealed behind a maintenance building. His years hunting violent criminals had taught him patience. Veronica Harmon arrived precisely at 2 p.m., but she wasn't alone. Two men in dark suits flanked her at a distance, trying to look like casual park visitors. Matthew noted their positions, their poor attempts at concealment, and the bulges under their jackets that suggested weapons. Harmon was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with prematurely gray hair and the pallor of someone who spent too much time indoors. She sat on the designated bench and waited, checking her phone repeatedly. Matthew approached from behind, using a jogger's path that kept him out of sight of her escorts. "Ms. Harmon," she startled, then composed herself quickly. "Mr. Hardy, thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries. What does Palmer want?" Harmon's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've been investigating. That's either very smart or very stupid." She gestured for him to sit, but Matthew remained standing. Dr. Palmer represents significant medical research interests. Emma's condition could contribute to breakthrough treatments for genetic disorders. Her condition? The biomarker in her jaw contains genetic sequencing that's extremely valuable for certain types of research. We're prepared to offer your family substantial compensation for her participation in a study. Matthew let his jacket fall open slightly, ensuring Harmon could see his holstered weapon. "How substantial?" $2 million. Tax-free, in exchange for 6 months of medical observation and testing. And if we refuse? Harmon's mask slipped for a moment, revealing something cold underneath. "Mr. Hardy, 46 other families have found our offers compelling. I'd hate for Emma to face the same difficulties as children whose parents were less cooperative." There was the threat, delivered with bureaucratic politeness. Matthew smiled, and Harmon seemed to sense she'd made a mistake. "Here's my counteroffer," Matthew said. "You and Palmer leave my family alone. Permanently. In exchange, I don't spend the rest of my life hunting you down. I don't think you understand the scope of what you're dealing with. Dr. Palmer has resources. Let me tell you what I understand." Matthew leaned closer, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made hardened criminals confess during interrogations. "I understand that Palmer's been kidnapping and murdering children for organ harvesting. I understand that you're either a co-conspirator or another victim he's controlling. And I understand that if anything happens to my daughter, I will personally ensure that everyone involved dies badly." Harmon stood up quickly, signaling her escorts. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Hardy." "No," Matthew replied, already backing toward his escape route. "Palmer made the mistake when he marked my daughter." As Harmon's escorts converged on his position, Matthew melted into the wooded area of the park. His military training and police experience served him well. Within minutes, he'd reached his truck through a route his pursuers couldn't follow. But as he drove back toward the cabin, Matthew's phone rang. The caller ID showed Krista's number. "Matt." Her voice was tight with fear. "Someone's here. 2 cars, government plates. They say they're from Child Protective Services." Matthew floored the accelerator. "Don't let them in. Don't sign anything. I'm 20 minutes out. They have paperwork. They say there's been a report of neglect, that Emma's been exposed to dangerous individuals. Krista, listen to me carefully. Take Emma to Harvey's weapons cache. Lock yourselves in and don't come out until I get there. Matt, they're saying if we don't cooperate, they'll involve the FBI. That Emma could be placed in protective custody." Matthew realized Palmer's strategy. Can't get the family to cooperate? Use the system against them. Create a paper trail of neglect or endangerment. Remove the child through legal channels. Then make her disappear in the bureaucratic maze. Stall them. I'm almost there. As he crested the hill overlooking Harvey's cabin, Matthew saw 3 black SUVs parked in the driveway. Men in suits stood near the vehicles while others approached the front door. This wasn't CPS. This was a military-style extraction team. Matthew parked his truck behind a stand of trees and approached on foot, using the forest for cover. Through the cabin's windows, he could see Krista in the living room, facing 2 men in suits while Emma stood behind her mother, confusion and fear clear on the child's face. One of the men was speaking into a radio. Target acquired. Child matches description. Recommend immediate extraction. Matthew circled to the back of the cabin, entering through Harvey's concealed entrance to the basement armory. The weapons cache contained everything from hunting rifles to military-grade equipment Harvey had acquired through channels that didn't bear close scrutiny. Matthew selected a tactical shotgun and moved upstairs, positioning himself where he could see the living room through a partially open door. Time to see how serious Palmer's people were about their operation. Mrs. Hardy, one of the men, was saying, "We have documentation indicating Emma may have been exposed to illegal medical experimentation. For her safety, we need to take her for evaluation." "What documentation?" Krista demanded, her nurse's training making her question authority when it came to patient care. The man produced an official-looking folder. "Reports indicate your husband has been in contact with known criminals engaged in medical fraud. Emma needs to be examined by qualified professionals to ensure her safety." Emma stepped forward, her 8-year-old voice cutting through the tension. "Are you bad men?" The question clearly unsettled Palmer's operatives. The lead man knelt down to Emma's level, attempting a reassuring smile. "We're here to help you, Emma. We're doctors. Real doctors don't scare people," Emma said with startling clarity. "And real doctors don't come to houses without appointments." Matthew felt pride surge through his fear. His daughter was braver than adults twice her age. The man's patience evaporated. He stood up and nodded to his partner. "Ma'am, we're taking the child now. You can cooperate or face federal charges for obstruction." That's when Matthew stepped into the room, shotgun pointed at the floor but clearly visible. "Or you can leave my property before I call the real authorities." The room went silent. The two men assessed Matthew, noting his stance, his grip on the weapon, and the deadly calm in his expression. These weren't street criminals they could intimidate. This was a trained professional who'd clearly decided their lives were forfeit. "Mr. Hardy," the lead man said carefully, "we're federal agents. Threatening us is a felony. Show me your badges." The men exchanged glances. After a moment, the lead man reached for his jacket. Matthew's shotgun came up instantly, and the man froze. Slowly, the badge looked authentic, but Matthew had seen enough fake identification to spot irregularities. The serial numbers were wrong, and the photo looked recently added. "Nice try," Matthew said. "But federal agents don't conduct child removals without local law enforcement support. They also don't use unmarked vehicles or threaten families in their homes." He raised the shotgun to shoulder level. "You have 10 seconds to be in your vehicles and off my property." The men backed toward the door, speaking rapidly into their radios. Matthew heard fragments: "Package secured. Negative. Armed resistance. Request backup." As the SUVs departed, Matthew knew this was just the opening move. Palmer's people would be back, and next time they'd come prepared for resistance. "Emma," he said, kneeling down to his daughter's level, "we're going to play a game for the next few days. It's called staying invisible. Can you do that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Are those men going to hurt us, Daddy?" Matthew looked into eyes that were far too wise for 8 years old. Someone had marked his daughter as a commodity before she could walk. They'd infiltrated his family, violated his home, and threatened the person he loved most in the world. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Not if I can help it." That night, after Emma was asleep, Matthew began planning Palmer's destruction in earnest. The federal prosecutor angle suggested Palmer had legitimate government connections, which meant playing by rules would only protect him. Matthew had spent his career bringing justice to people who thought they were above the law. Curtis Palmer was about to learn what justice looked like when the law couldn't reach you. Chapter 5. The Hunter and the Hunted. Dr. Rosario Chun arrived at Harvey's cabin just after dawn, her medical bag and laptop case suggesting she'd driven through the night from San Francisco. Matthew had reached out to her after confirming her credentials through Bruce Weber's investigation. Unlike the other members of Dr. Wall's group, Chun had impeccable documentation, a pediatric surgeon at UCSF with 20 years of spotless service. "I came as soon as I got your message," she said, embracing Krista warmly. "How's Emma holding up?" "She thinks we're camping," Krista replied. But she started to ask questions. Chun examined Emma's x-rays on her laptop, comparing them to images from other cases. The markers more sophisticated than most. Dunlap, or whoever he really is, has refined the technology significantly. "Can you remove it?" Matthew asked. "Theoretically, yes, but it would require specialized surgical equipment and a sterile environment. More importantly, removing it might trigger whatever tracking or monitoring systems are integrated with the marker. Matthew had suspected as much, so we can't just cut it out and run. Not without risking Emma's life. The marker appears to be integrated with several major nerve pathways. Remove it incorrectly, and she could lose motor function in her face and jaw. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas. "Dr. Chun, are you going to check my teeth too?" Chun smiled warmly. "Maybe later, sweetheart. Right now, I'm just visiting with your parents." As Emma went to get dressed, Chun's expression grew serious. "Matthew, I need to tell you something about my own situation. My daughter Sophia was taken 2 years ago. I've been hunting Palmer ever since." "Taken how?" "Approached at school by people claiming to be conducting a medical study. They had official paperwork, parent consent forms, the works. By the time I realized the forms were forged, Sophia was gone." Chin's voice remained steady, but Matthew could see the pain in her eyes. "Palmer offered me a deal afterward. Stop investigating, and Sophia would be returned unharmed. But you kept investigating. I'm a surgeon. I know what happens to children in Palmer's facilities." She pulled up files on her laptop. "I've been documenting his operations for 18 months. Medical supply purchases, personnel movements, financial transfers. He's running a sophisticated organ harvesting network with government protection." Matthew studied the data. "What's his endgame? This seems like a lot of infrastructure for black market organs." "It's not black market. It's white market. Legal sales to wealthy clients who don't want to wait for traditional organ donor lists. Palmer maintains a registry of children with specific genetic markers. When a client needs a liver, heart, or kidney with precise compatibility requirements, Palmer delivers." The clinical nature of the explanation made it somehow worse. These weren't desperate criminals driven by poverty or addiction. These were wealthy, powerful people who viewed children as inventory to be harvested when convenient. Krista joined them, having overheard the conversation. "How many clients?" "I've identified at least 30. Politicians, entertainment executives, foreign nationals. People with enough money to buy perfect genetic matches instead of waiting their turn." Matthew's phone buzzed with a text from Bruce Weber. "Seattle facility cleaned out professionally. No evidence left, but found something interesting in county records. Palmer purchased property near your location 48 hours ago. 200-acre compound, 15 miles northeast of your position." Matthew showed the message to Chun and Krista. "He's not giving up. He's setting up locally to finish this." "What do we do?" Krista asked. Matthew was already moving toward Harvey's weapon cache. "We stop running and start hunting." Chun looked alarmed. "Matthew, Palmer has unlimited resources. You can't fight him directly. Watch me." Matthew began loading tactical gear into a duffel bag. "Chun, I need you to stay here with Krista and Emma. If I'm not back by midnight, take them to Agent Jose Scott at the FBI field office. Tell him everything." "Where are you going?" "To have a conversation with Curtis Palmer." Krista grabbed his arm. "This is insane. You're one person against an entire organization." Matthew turned to face his wife, and she saw the same expression that had made violent criminals surrender rather than face him in dark alleys. "Krista, someone put a tracking device in our daughter's jaw when she was an infant. They've been planning to murder her for 8 years. Palmer thinks he's hunting us, but he made one critical error." "What's that?" "He threatened my family." Matthew shouldered the duffel bag. "Curtis Palmer has never dealt with someone like me." As Matthew disappeared into the forest, moving toward Palmer's newly established compound, Krista found herself praying for the first time in years. But she wasn't praying for her husband's safety. She was praying for Palmer's soul, because she'd seen what Matthew Hardy did to people who hurt children. And Palmer had hurt a lot of children. Chapter 6. Into the Lion's Den. The compound Palmer had purchased sat in a valley, surrounded by dense forest, accessible by a single road that wound through terrain perfect for an ambush. Matthew spent 4 hours conducting reconnaissance, mapping guard positions, camera placements, and patrol patterns through his scope. Palmer's security was professional but predictable. 12-man teams, rotating shifts, standard corporate security protocols. They were prepared for investigators, whistleblowers, maybe even federal raids. They weren't prepared for a hunter. Matthew's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. Hardy, I know you're watching. Let's talk. Alone. Main building, 3rd floor. 1 hour. CP. Either Palmer was very confident or very stupid. Matthew suspected both. He circled the compound, identifying weak points in the perimeter. The facility's legitimate medical research cover meant they couldn't appear too fortress-like. Security cameras had blind spots, fence lines had gaps near drainage areas, and the forest provided concealment right to the building's edge. At exactly 8 p.m., Matthew cut through the fence behind the main building and made his way to the service entrance. The door was unlocked, Palmer's invitation. The elevator to the 3rd floor was waiting, also unlocked. The man waiting in the executive office looked nothing like Matthew had imagined. Curtis Palmer was in his 60s, well-dressed, but not ostentatious, with the bearing of a university professor rather than a criminal mastermind. He sat behind a mahogany desk, hands folded calmly, as if receiving expected guests. Detective Hardy, please sit. Palmer's voice carried a slight accent Matthew couldn't place. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but your refusal to cooperate has forced some urgency. Matthew remained standing, noting exit routes and potential weapons. Where's Emma's real birth mother? Direct. I appreciate that. Palmer opened a file folder. Emma's biological mother was Maria Santos, age 19, undocumented immigrant from El Salvador. She participated in our genetic research program in exchange for medical care during pregnancy. Participated or was coerced. The distinction is irrelevant now. Ms. Santos fulfilled her obligations and was compensated appropriately. She's dead. Medical complications during childbirth. Regrettable, but not uncommon in high-risk pregnancies. Palmer's tone suggested he was discussing weather patterns rather than human lives. Matthew felt his anger crystallizing into something cold and focused. How many children are in your program? Currently, 47 active subjects across 12 states. Emma represents our most genetically valuable acquisition to date. Acquisition. Palmer smiled thinly. Please don't pretend moral outrage, detective. You spent 20 years investigating homicides in Portland. You know what humans do to each other for money, drugs, territory. I simply apply market principles to medical need. My clients require specific genetic matches for survival. I provide them by murdering children, by conducting advanced medical research with voluntary subjects. Palmer opened another file. Your daughter's marker indicates tissue compatibility with a client who requires a liver transplant within 6 months. Emma's genetic profile suggests her liver would be a perfect match. Matthew's hand moved toward his weapon, but Palmer raised a finger. Before you do something irreversible, consider this. I currently employ Veronica Harmon as a legal consultant. Her daughter Sophia is safely housed at our Seattle research facility, receiving excellent medical care. Ms. Harmon's cooperation ensures Sophia's continued well-being. You're blackmailing a federal prosecutor. I'm providing employment to a mother whose child requires specialized medical attention. Sophia's marker was removed surgically, but the procedure caused some nerve damage. She needs ongoing treatment that costs approximately $50,000 monthly. Matthew began to understand Palmer's operation more clearly. It wasn't just about organ harvesting. It was about creating a network of compromised professionals who couldn't expose him without destroying themselves. Dr. Walls, his grandson has a marker. Young Timothy, age 6. Dr. Walls provides identification services in exchange for Timothy's safety. Palmer leaned back in his chair. You see, detective, everyone in our network has excellent reasons for cooperation. Except me. Except you. Which brings us to our current situation. Palmer pressed a button on his desk, and monitors around the room displayed live video feeds. Harvey's cabin from multiple angles, showing Krista and Emma inside. Your wife and daughter are currently surrounded by my security team. Dr. Chun is also with them, I see. Matthew's blood went cold, but his expression didn't change. If you hurt them, I won't need to. You're going to cooperate because you're intelligent enough to recognize reality. Emma's marker makes her extremely valuable to my organization. You can profit from that value, or you can be eliminated as an obstacle to accessing it. Matthew studied the monitors, counting personnel, and noting positions. 12 men surrounded the cabin, armed and positioned for a tactical assault. Even if Harvey's security systems held them off temporarily, it would only delay the inevitable. What exactly are you offering? Palmer smiled, sensing victory. $5 million. Immediate relocation to any country of your choice. New identities for your family. Emma receives the best medical care available while contributing to research that will save lives. And after your client gets Emma's liver, Emma will be remembered as a hero whose sacrifice advanced medical science. Palmer's casual tone made the statement even more chilling. Many families would consider that a meaningful legacy. Matthew appeared to consider the offer, studying the monitors and noting details Palmer probably didn't realize he was absorbing. Guard positions, communication equipment, the layout of Palmer's compound. I have conditions, Matthew said finally. I'm listening. First, I want to see Emma's medical file. All of it. I want to know exactly what you did to her and when. Palmer nodded. Reasonable. Second, I want proof that families who've cooperated were actually relocated and not eliminated. Also reasonable. Third, I want to meet your client. The person who's buying my daughter's liver. Palmer hesitated. That's unusual, but perhaps it could be arranged. Matthew smiled for the first time since entering the office. Good, because I'm going to need to look him in the eye when I kill him. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Palmer's confident expression faltered as he reassessed the man sitting across from him. Detective Hardy, I think you misunderstand. Matthew stood up slowly. No, Mr. Palmer, you misunderstand. You think I'm here to negotiate. I'm not. I'm here to declare war. Palmer pressed another button on his desk, probably summoning security. You're surrounded, detective. Your family is surrounded. You have no leverage. I have something better than leverage, Matthew replied, moving toward the window. I have nothing left to lose. Before Palmer could respond, Matthew smashed through the third-floor window in a shower of glass and steel, disappearing into the night forest below. Palmer stared at the shattered window in disbelief. Security teams were already mobilizing, but Matthew Hardy had vanished into terrain he knew intimately, carrying enough weapons and training to make Palmer's life very complicated. The hunter had just become the hunted. Chapter 7. The Setup. Matthew moved through the forest like a ghost, using skills learned in Afghanistan and refined during 2 decades of police work. Palmer's security teams were competent but loud, their radio communications giving away positions and search patterns. Within an hour, Matthew had circled back to a position overlooking Harvey's cabin. The tactical situation was worse than he'd hoped. Palmer's people had established a perimeter with overlapping fields of fire, making direct assault suicide. But Matthew wasn't planning a direct assault. He was planning something much more personal. His encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chun, family secure in basement. Harvey's panic room will hold indefinitely. Security team getting frustrated. What's your play? Matthew smiled grimly as he typed back. Palmer wants to play games with children. Time to show him what happens when you threaten the wrong family. Over the next 3 hours, Matthew systematically dismantled Palmer's operation piece by piece. He started with communications, using techniques learned during counterterrorism operations to jam radio frequencies and disrupt cell coverage. Palmer's teams found themselves isolated, unable to coordinate effectively. Next came psychological warfare. Matthew began picking off perimeter guards one by one, not killing them, but leaving them zip-tied in positions where their teammates would find them. Each discovery ratcheted up the fear factor, making Palmer's people jumpy and prone to mistakes. By midnight, Palmer's 12-man team had been reduced to 6, and those 6 were clustered around the cabin in a defensive position that made them sitting ducks for anyone with high ground and patience. Matthew's phone rang, Palmer calling directly. Impressive work, detective. You're better than I anticipated. I'm just getting started. I can see that. Perhaps we should reconsider our arrangement. Matthew had positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the compound, his rifle scope trained on Palmer's office window. Here's my new arrangement. Release my family. Leave the country. Never come back. I'm afraid that's not possible. Too much has been invested in this operation to simply abandon it. Then you die tonight. Palmer's silence stretched for nearly a minute. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, less confident, more calculating. You know, detective, there's something I should mention about Emma's adoption. I'm listening. You weren't randomly selected as adoptive parents. We specifically chose you because of your background. Military service, law enforcement experience, strong moral code. We needed Emma placed with someone who would protect her if the situation became complicated. Matthew's scope remained steady on Palmer's silhouette, meaning you were always meant to be the last line of defense. Emma's marker doesn't just contain genetic information. It contains encrypted evidence of our entire operation. Client lists, financial records, documentation of every child we've processed. The revelation hit Matthew like a physical blow. You turn my daughter into a walking hard drive. Insurance policy. If our operation was ever compromised, Emma's marker would ensure mutual destruction. Expose us, and you expose evidence that would implicate dozens of powerful people who would kill to keep their secrets safe. Matthew felt the trap closing around him. Palmer hadn't just stolen his daughter. He'd made her into a living dead man's switch. Remove the marker, and Emma dies. Expose Palmer's operation, and Emma becomes a target for every powerful person on his client list. You're wondering if there's a way out, Palmer continued. There isn't. Emma's value lies not just in her organs, but in her silence. As long as she exists, she represents a threat to very dangerous people. Unless she disappears into our program. New identity, isolated facility, complete medical care for life. She lives, but Curtis Palmer's secrets die with her original identity. Matthew lowered his rifle. Palmer was offering a devil's bargain. Emma's life in exchange for her freedom. Keep her safe by making her a prisoner, or try to free her and make her a target for every criminal Palmer had ever served. But Matthew Hardy hadn't become a successful detective by accepting impossible situations. Every case had a solution if you were willing to think beyond conventional approaches. I'll need time to consider your offer, Matthew said. 24 hours. After that, the situation becomes fluid. As Palmer ended the call, Matthew was already formulating a new plan. Palmer thought he held all the cards, but he'd made a crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed Matthew would prioritize Emma's safety over justice. Palmer had never dealt with someone who viewed justice and safety as the same thing. Matthew's next call was to Earl Rich, the private investigator whose grandson had been marked. Earl, it's Matthew Hardy. I need to know everything you've learned about Palmer's client list. Jesus, Matt, where are you? Word is Palmer's got half the Pacific Northwest looking for you. Good. Let them look. What do you know about his clients? Earl's voice dropped to a whisper. I've identified 12 major buyers. Politicians, entertainment executives, a Supreme Court justice's wife. These people have enough power to make entire investigations disappear. Any of them local? Actually, yes. Philip Dunlap, the fake identity Palmer uses for medical operations, has been treating a client in Portland for 6 months. Regular visits, specialized care. I think Palmer's been preparing for a major procedure. Matthew felt pieces clicking into place. What kind of procedure? Liver transplant. Client is a man named Nicholas Birch, age 54. Owns 3 casinos in Nevada and has connections to organized crime. He's been on the donor list for 2 years, but his legal troubles make him ineligible for legitimate transplants. So Palmer promised him a perfect genetic match. Exactly. And according to medical records I acquired, Birch's condition is deteriorating rapidly. He needs the transplant within weeks or he dies. Matthew smiled for the first time in days. Palmer's operation depended on maintaining secrecy and avoiding attention. But what if the operation became very public very quickly? Earl, how would you like to help me destroy Curtis Palmer? I've been waiting 2 years for that opportunity. Good, because I'm about to turn Palmer's own system against him. As Matthew outlined his plan, Earl's laughter carried across the encrypted connection. Matt, that's either brilliant or completely insane. Sometimes there's no difference. Matthew ended the call, and began moving toward Palmer's compound. The real game was about to begin, and this time, Matthew Hardy was making the rules. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. Nicholas Birch's casino penthouse in Portland was everything Matthew had expected: gaudy, excessive, and secured by men who thought intimidation was the same as competence. Matthew had been watching the building for 6 hours, timing guard rotations and identifying vulnerabilities. Earl Rich's intelligence had been accurate. Birch was indeed Palmer's client, scheduled for liver transplant surgery in 3 days at a private medical facility Palmer had established in an abandoned hospital outside the city. The surgery would use Emma's liver, assuming Palmer could complete her acquisition. But Matthew wasn't planning to prevent the surgery. He was planning to ensure it happened exactly as scheduled, with one crucial modification. At 3 a.m., Matthew entered Birch's penthouse through a service elevator maintenance shaft, bypassing electronic security through methods learned during covert operations. Birch's bodyguard were positioned to stop threats coming through normal channels: doors, windows, stairwells. They weren't watching for someone who approached through the building's infrastructure. Birch himself was awake, sitting in his study reviewing what appeared to be medical reports. The man was visibly ill: jaundiced skin, labored breathing, the telltale signs of liver failure. Palmer had chosen his client well. Birch was desperate enough to agree to anything. "Mr. Birch," Matthew said quietly, stepping from the shadows. Birch spun around, reaching for a panic button, but stopped when he saw Matthew's calm demeanor and raised hands. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "My name is Matthew Hardy. I believe you're planning to purchase my daughter's liver." Birch's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Matthew sat down uninvited, studying Birch with the same intensity he'd once used on murder suspects. "Let me tell you what I know. You're Nicholas Birch, age 54, worth approximately $40 million from casino operations. You've been on the liver transplant list for 18 months, but were removed due to lifestyle factors, meaning your criminal connections." Birch said nothing, but his breathing became more labored. "Dr. Palmer approached you 6 months ago with a private solution. Perfect genetic match, guaranteed compatibility, surgery performed at a facility outside normal oversight. Cost, $3 million, plus ongoing considerations." "You're insane." Matthew pulled out his phone, showing Birch photographs of Emma. "This is the 8-year-old child whose liver you've purchased. Her name is Emma Hardy. She likes to read, she's learning to play piano, and she builds elaborate fairy houses in our backyard." Birch looked at the photographs, and Matthew saw something flicker across his face. Guilt? Regret? It was quickly replaced by defensive anger. "I didn't ask for any of this." Birch said. "Palmer approached me. He said the children were already dying, that the organs would be wasted otherwise." "What children?" "Terminal cases. Kids with brain cancer, genetic disorders. Palmer said the organs were being harvested from children who were going to die anyway." Matthew felt a moment of surprise. Palmer had told Birch a completely different story than the organ farming operation Shen had described. Either Palmer compartmentalized his lies, or there were multiple operations running simultaneously. "Mr. Birch, let me be very clear about something. Emma is perfectly healthy. So are the other 46 children Palmer has processed. He's not harvesting organs from terminal patients. He's murdering healthy kids for profit." Birch stared at the photographs for a long moment. "Jesus Christ, what have I done?" "That depends on what you do next." Matthew leaned forward. "You have 2 choices. Continue with Palmer's surgery and spend whatever time you have left knowing you murdered child. Or help me stop him." "Help you how?" "Palmer's got connections everywhere. Police, federal agencies, hospital boards. He's untouchable. Everyone's touchable if you know where to press." Matthew pulled out a recording device. "I need you to make a phone call to Palmer. Tell him you've had second thoughts about the surgery. He'll never believe that. I'm dying. You're not canceling the surgery. You're requesting a meeting with the organ donor first. Tell him you want to ensure the child understands the importance of her sacrifice." Birch looked horrified. "Why would I want to meet her?" "Because Palmer's entire operation depends on maintaining the illusion that this is legitimate medical research. If a client starts asking uncomfortable questions, showing unusual interest in the donors. It threatens the psychological distance that allows his people to function. Matthew could see Birch processing this. You're trying to spook his organization. I'm trying to force Palmer into making mistakes. Stressed people make bad decisions. Bad decisions create opportunities. Birch made the call, following Matthew's script precisely. Palmer's voice came through clearly on the speakerphone, initially resistant but gradually agreeing to arrange a meeting between client and donor. Excellent, Palmer said finally. We'll arrange something appropriate. Perhaps a brief interaction where Emma can understand the importance of her contribution to medical science. After ending the call, Birch looked nauseated. He talks about her like she's livestock. Now you're beginning to understand. Matthew stood to leave. The meeting is tomorrow at 2 p.m. You're going to wear a wire and record everything Palmer says about his operation. What if he discovers the recording? Matthew's smile was cold as winter. Then you'll die knowing you helped save 47 other children from the same fate. As Matthew prepared to leave, Birch called after him. Detective, if we do this, if we expose Palmer, what happens to Sophia Harmon? To Dr. Wall's grandson? To all the other children he's holding? Matthew paused at the window. We save them all, Mr. Birch. Every single one. How can you be sure? Because, Matthew said, disappearing back into the maintenance shaft, Curtis Palmer has never faced someone who fights for children the way I do. The next phase of Matthew's plan required perfect timing and nerves of steel. Palmer thought he was orchestrating a meeting between predator and prey. Instead, he was walking into a trap that would destroy his entire operation. And Matthew Hardy would be there to spring it. Chapter 9. Justice Served. The abandoned St. Mary's Hospital sat on 15 acres of overgrown landscape, its Gothic architecture perfect for Palmer's purposes. The building had been closed for 5 years due to budget cuts, but Palmer had purchased it through shell companies and converted the surgical suites into a private medical facility. Matthew positioned himself in the hospital's bell tower 90 minutes before the scheduled meeting, his rifle trained on the main entrance while monitoring radio frequencies Palmer's team used. Earl Rich was stationed in a van outside the perimeter, recording everything and ready to transmit evidence to media outlets and federal authorities if the operation went wrong. At exactly 2 p.m., 3 vehicles arrived. Palmer emerged from the first, followed by Veronica Harmon and 2 security guards. The second vehicle contained Nicholas Birch, looking pale but determined. The third vehicle made Matthew's blood boil. Emma sat between 2 adults, her small face pressed against the window as she stared at the imposing hospital building. Matthew activated his recording equipment as the group moved inside. Birch wore a wire provided by Earl Rich, sophisticated enough to transmit clearly while remaining undetectable to standard security sweeps. Through his scope, Matthew watched the group enter the hospital's main surgical suite. Palmer had prepared the space carefully. Medical equipment that looked legitimate but was actually designed for organ harvesting, monitoring systems that would record Emma's vital signs during the procedure, and restraints disguised as safety equipment. Palmer's voice came through clearly on Birch's wire. Mr. Birch, I'd like you to meet Emma. Emma, this is the gentleman whose life you're going to save. Emma's 8-year-old voice carried across the transmission with heartbreaking clarity. Are you sick, Mr. Birch? Yes, sweetheart. Very sick. My daddy says sick people need help. Are the doctors going to help you? Matthew heard Birch's sharp intake of breath through the wire. Palmer stepped in smoothly. That's right, Emma. You're going to help Mr. Birch get better. It's a very special kind of help. Will it hurt? You won't feel anything at all, Palmer replied with clinical precision. The procedure will be conducted under general anesthesia. You'll simply go to sleep, and when you wake up, Mr. Birch will be much healthier. Emma's innocent voice cut through Palmer's lies. But if you take my liver, won't I get sick too? The silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, Palmer spoke. Emma, sometimes helping others requires sacrifice. Your sacrifice will save Mr. Birch's life and advance medical research that could help thousands of other children. But I don't want to die. Matthew had to grip his rifle stock to keep his hands steady. Through his scope, he could see Emma standing in the surgical suite, dwarfed by adults who viewed her as nothing more than a source of spare parts. Birch's voice cracked as he spoke. Palmer, she understands what you're planning to do. Children adapt quickly to medical procedures. Emma will be sedated shortly, and she knows you're going to kill her. Birch's voice grew stronger. Jesus Christ, Palmer, she's just a baby. Matthew heard movement through the wire. Probably Palmer signaling his security team. Mr. Birch, I think you're experiencing pre-surgical anxiety. Perhaps we should postpone. No. Birch's voice carried new resolve. Emma, sweetheart, come here. Through his scope, Matthew watched Birch kneel down to Emma's level, his back to Palmer and the security guards. What happened next made Matthew realize he'd underestimated the dying man's courage. Emma, Birch said quietly, when I count to 3, I want you to run as fast as you can toward that red exit sign. Can you do that for me? Mr. Birch, please don't interfere with the procedure, Palmer said sharply. 1, Birch said, standing up and moving between Emma and Palmer's team. Security, restrain Mr. Birch immediately, Palmer ordered. 2, the security guards moved forward, but Birch was already in motion. Despite his illness, he threw himself at the nearest guard, disrupting their formation and creating chaos in the confined space. 3, Birch shouted. Emma ran. Palmer's voice cut through the commotion. Stop her. If she reaches the exit, we lose everything. Matthew was already moving, rappelling down the bell tower's exterior and crashing through a second-floor window as Emma reached the hospital's main corridor. He landed hard but rolled, coming up with his weapon drawn as Palmer's remaining security team spread out to search for the fleeing child. Emma, Matthew called. This way, his daughter's voice echoed from somewhere in the hospital's maze of corridors. Daddy! Palmer's people were closing in, and Matthew could hear Palmer himself coordinating the search over radio. She can't leave this building. Too much depends on maintaining operational security. Matthew moved through the hospital systematically, using his knowledge of the building's layout gained from studying architectural plans. He found Emma hiding in a supply closet on the first floor, tears streaming down her face, but trying to be brave. Daddy, the bad men want to hurt me. I know, sweetheart, but they're not going to get the chance. Matthew lifted Emma, noting that she was lighter than she should be for her age. Palmer's marker had affected her development in subtle ways that were only now becoming apparent. They reached the main exit just as Palmer's team converged on their position. 3 armed men blocked the doorway, weapons drawn but not aimed. They needed Emma alive and undamaged. Detective Hardy, Palmer's voice came from behind them. You're only delaying the inevitable. I have resources you can't imagine, connections you can't fight. Surrender now, and I'll ensure Emma's procedure is as comfortable as possible. Matthew turned to face Palmer, noting the man's position relative to his security team. In his arms, Emma pressed her face against his shoulder, trying to hide from the nightmare surrounding her. You're right about one thing, Palmer. You do have resources I can't imagine. Matthew smiled. But you made one critical error. What's that? You assumed I was fighting alone. The hospital's lights cut out simultaneously, plunging the building into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, but the disruption was enough. Earl Rich and his team entered through multiple access points, armed and moving with military precision. In the confusion, Matthew noticed movement from an unexpected direction. Nicholas Birch appeared behind Palmer, having somehow overpowered his guards. The dying man held a scalpel he'd taken from the surgical suite. Dr. Curtis Palmer, Birch said, his voice carrying across the chaos. You're under citizen's arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Palmer spun around, reaching for a weapon, but Birch was faster. The scalpel found Palmer's throat with surgical precision, guided by a man who'd spent months studying medical procedures in preparation for his own surgery. Palmer collapsed, his life ending in the same sterile, clinical manner he'd planned for 47 children. The aftermath moved quickly. Earl Rich's team secured Palmer's remaining personnel, while Matthew called Agent Jose Scott directly. The FBI arrived within an hour, followed by media outlets that Earl had prepositioned based on Matthew's instructions. By dawn, Palmer's operation was front-page news across the country. The encrypted data from Emma's marker, extracted safely by Dr. Chun using equipment from Palmer's own facility, provided evidence that destroyed Palmer's entire network. Clients were arrested, facilities raided, and children reunited with families who'd thought they were dead. Veronica Harmon was found in Palmer's facility, having been held prisoner rather than employed as claimed. Her daughter Sophia was alive, damaged but healing, and mother and daughter were reunited after 3 years of separation. Dr. Walls and his grandson were placed in protective custody until the full scope of Palmer's network could be mapped and destroyed. The system Palmer had used to control his accomplices became the key to liberating them. 3 months later, Matthew sat in his backyard watching Emma build fairy houses while Krista tended her garden. Emma's marker had been successfully removed by Dr. Chun, with no lasting effects beyond a small scar that would fade with time. Emma looked up from her construction project. "Daddy, do you think the bad man is sorry for what he did?" Matthew considered the question seriously. Palmer had died, believing he was conducting legitimate medical research, that his clients deserved life more than the children who provided it. Sociopaths rarely experienced genuine remorse. "I think he was very sick, sweetheart. Sick in a way that made him unable to understand right from wrong. Like when I had a fever and said mean things to Mom. Something like that. But some kinds of sickness can't be cured." Emma nodded solemnly and returned to her fairy house. Matthew watched her work, marveling at the resilience of children. Emma remembered the scary men and the big hospital, but to her, it was just another adventure that had ended safely. Krista joined him on the deck, coffee in hand. Dr. Chin called. They found the last of Palmer's facilities in Mexico. 18 children recovered, all alive. That makes 65 total. The FBI thinks there might be more. Palmer's records go back 20 years. Matthew nodded, already knowing he'd spend the rest of his life ensuring every child Palmer had touched was found and returned home safely. Some fights didn't end with a single victory. They required a lifetime of vigilance. Nicholas Birch had survived his liver transplant, receiving an organ from a legitimate donor who died in an accident. He'd used his connections to help the FBI track down Palmer's clients, seeking redemption for his near participation in Emma's murder. The man who'd been willing to kill a child for his own survival had become one of the operation's most valuable witnesses. "Any regrets?" Krista asked, settling beside her husband. Matthew watched Emma carry her completed fairy house to the garden, chattering to herself about the imaginary creatures who would live there. His daughter was safe. Dozens of other children had been rescued,